Let's talk a little bit about sex in this context, because I think there's a couple of different narratives around sex in a long-term relationship. The first is we've already sort of touched on it, that when you are initially in a relationship, there's pheromones, there's infatuation, there's dopamine, there's you just can't get enough of each other.
Yeah.
And that usually lasts typically in terms of, neuroscience, looks like it lasts around 1 to 2 years. And then after and that's sort of you can look at this from an evolutionary perspective. You can cut it a lot of different ways. Like it's supposed, get in, have the babies, and then after that, the dopamine, the serotonin, the excitement, all of that seems to temper down. However, I take issue with it, and I'll tell you, I would say that 2 years is it's time, but it's not really a ton of time, I would say, for intimacy. And the framework that I like to think about, um, you know, intimate relationships with your partner is that I would like to think, and maybe this is just fantasy, so you can redirect me here, but I would like it to get better with time rather than worse,
Hmm.
because there is that trust and intimacy, and we're working hard to remove that residue that can sort of pile up in a relationship over time. We all hear about they've been married for 50 years, but they might as well just be roommates. Like, they don't know each other, they're trying to spend as much time apart as they can. So how does well tell me, let's just start with, am I wrong for wanting that? Am I wrong for wanting my sex life to get better with time?
Not at all.
Is that
So awesome.
yeah, and don't Gio's not gonna listen to this, don't worry, you don't.
Okay.
No, but
Not at
is that
all.
is that is that a fantasy for me to say, "Listen, I wanna work on this," and for that intimate sort of partnership with him to be curated and get better with time? Or is it just like we're cruising downhill from here?
No, I'm with you. I think it's a beautiful aspiration and very possible. Now, if you and Geo, let's say, had a bunch of other issues, let's say you weren't aligned on your parenting, there were some unresolved resentments about your families, and there was just a bunch of stuff in the way. You shouldn't expect that, because sex is almost over in a long term relationship over many years. Sex is like this beautiful reward you get for keeping things safe and clean and clear between the two of you. Because why would you ask your partner to open their body to you when you're being a complete asshole? Um, you've got to earn the right to make love to your partner in a really beautiful way that will improve over time. And if two couples are actively engaged in keeping their relationship vibes really clean and clear and at zero, and like, hey, we're good. We have conflicts. We get upset. Yes, but we repair them. That couple usually has a better sex life than someone who's not doing that work. And that's long term for sure. And yeah, I'm with you in that it can totally improve and does improve, I think, over time, because you get to know each other more intimately. The trauma history comes out, just the memory in the body and the sensitivities. There are all these beautiful and sometimes painful and shameful things to work through and get closer. Like, sex just becomes a crucible for learning about ourselves and each other.
And it's a vector for healing too, and to sort of be witness to someone. A lot of I've heard Nicole LePera talk about this, and certainly have had conversations with girlfriends who, post orgasm can find themselves crying, or having this sort of release, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to witness your partner have
Oh my
that
God.
healing moment, and that you have been a part of it in creating it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So healing. So there's so much healing in sex over time.
Can we have, and maybe the bigger question here is, can you have a relationship, a long-term relationship, without sex, without intimacy? Can they exist?
Yes. And people do all the time. Now, we could then ask the question, are those people fulfilled? And then we might get a different answer, right? Like, could I be fulfilled in a sexless long-term relationship? Probably, if I'm getting all my other needs met and my sexuality has just gone offline for whatever reason, both of us, and we sort of agree to kind of not go there. But the rest of our life is fairly meaningful and good. I think that could happen, but I don't think it does happen for most people. I think people are in fear. They've just like sequestered this part of their lives and justified it in their head as like, well, I can't have that, or it's not for me, and we're just fine without it. And then they set their lives up to kind of avoid it. I just think they're missing out on a huge part of their journey and a part of their healing together. But I think people do all kinds of things, right, in relationship and justify it. And but again, fulfillment. Am I fulfilled? Can I totally be myself here? Does my partner have my back? Do I have their back? And are we really being ourselves here? Those are kind of the hallmarks where when we can kind of start to see if someone is actually rocking it out.
And what if a couple has mismatched sex drives? And I wanted to talk about this because I know, and I was saying to this in the pre chat, in menopause, a lot of women will
Yeah.
start to acquire more gynecological issues than maybe they've experienced in their lives, where we start to see changes in estrogen levels. So that's changes in drive, both in excitement and receptivity to sex, and even just like lubrication and the ability to orgasm. And the tissues are dry because they're not being nourished with this hormone anymore, particularly in menopause. But it can be wildly fluctuating as well for many women in perimenopause as well. So, what are some of the things that, either the women or men who are listening to this show can think about when they're navigating mismatched sex drives? And I'm talking more about this for the woman who may be experiencing a lower sex drive.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, I can, after my children, like I was not thinking about anything other than my children. Like
Yeah.
there was no desire. It was like in the tank and took a while to actually come back online. So is there something that we can be thinking about if there is a couple, maybe she's in her, 40s or 50s, 60s, and there's a difference that they're noticing in their sex drives?
Yeah, absolutely. And my wife is in perimenopause, and what I'm learning through her, not only with her body, but the women she's studying with and talking to, is this is a pretty common thing that you're spelling out here. And we're navigating a version of this now. And it's, like anything that happens in our lives, whether it's a health problem or menopause or different sex drives, these are all opportunities for us to get to know each other, respect each other, deepen, learn about ourselves and each other. So it kind of doesn't matter what the issue is, but let's say it's mismatched sex drives. It's just like, cool, let's talk about it. What's the impact on you? What's the impact on me? When you're always wanting sex and I'm hardly ever wanting sex, what is that like for us? Do I feel kind of start to feel like pressure and then I have to abandon myself to have sex with you? Well, do you really want that? Do you want me to abandon myself? No, of course not. And then what is it like for me that I'm feeling dropped over here? Like you don't care about my body. You don't love me or you don't want to touch me. Like that sucks. And I want you to know that. And so these are, and without blame, there's just this really wonderful open door to say, this is the stage we're at in our relationship. What's going on? Let's look at it. Let's get in there. And how can we meet somewhere in the middle? Or is there other ways I can pleasure you that would feel good to you, that would also feel good to me? Can we like stop defining sex as just intercourse, that it's so many other things and it's so much bigger? Can we open up, this learning experience for both of us?
And what about in the case of infidelity? So there's been a partner who has stepped outside their marriage for maybe for that reason, or maybe for other, there could be several other thousand reasons why somebody does that. What is a relationship doomed if there is infidelity? Can you repair and move forward? What have you seen in practice?
Absolutely, it can be repaired. I interviewed a couple actually on my podcast, a couple couples over the course of my podcast that recovered from affairs. And a lot of people don't, because the hurt feels so big and the betrayal can trigger such a violation in trust that one or both people just feel completely, close hearted and shut down and hurt. And then they don't want to, the problem with some of those people is they don't want to heal, and they're sort of get stuck in a victim position, and then they can't get any traction, and then they go ahead with their life story of like, yeah, I got cheated on and men are all bad and this is fucked up, and decades go by and they're still in their victim position. I'm just like, look, it happened, it's terrible, of course, and you got to heal with or without them. You got to heal, and there's ways to do that, together or alone. But I often find, like, I just worked with a couple recently who the man had an emotional affair, with sort of a colleague, not quite coworker.
What's an emotional affair?
An emotional affair is I start a relationship, say, with this coworker, And he started having more fun with her than his wife, and they started doing things together as colleagues, and they justified them as, well, it's a work trip or it's a work thing. So there's no touching, there's no sleeping together, there's no kissing, there's no holding hands, none of that's there. But then they begin a text relationship, they start communicating over email, and it just feels really good. It feels like I got a new friend. And a lot of people, that's okay as long as you're not hiding it from your partner. But the moment you're starting to hide your texts or emails, that's an emotional affair. And what I've uncovered after working with a lot of these, and I've had an emotional affair many years ago, is anger. Hurt and anger are usually driving emotional affairs, and it's kind of like a fuck you to the partner.
The person who's instigating the emotional affair, there's hurt and anger in that individual.
In that individual, it's deep down and it's buried. They don't have contact with it. It's unconscious, and this is acting out. An emotional affair
And
is
this is relative to their partner. They're angry at their partner. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes they're projecting shit onto their partner, but often they're with a partner. And this is why when I'm working with affairs, I always say it takes two people to have an affair, not you and the person you had an affair with, but you two as a couple, the person that acted out and the person that got cheated on. That's two people. And I always challenge the person who got cheated on to take responsibility for their part. And they, of course, don't like that initially. But when I push them, they usually can find out, yeah, I actually was neglecting my partner. I was really self-absorbed. I was working all the time. I didn't behave in a way that had them feel like a priority. When you can get into some ownership there, you're less of a victim. But as the couple heals, and you uncover those layers, they're like, oh, I can see why. Because an affair can really heal when both people are taking responsibility for co-creating the conditions. Now, one person acted out and actually did the cheating. Of course, that person's more at fault, you could say. But when the other person can say, I played a role here, man, the healing that can happen is really profound. And they can become a stronger couple with a stronger relationship.
Have you talked about this on your own podcast with your own
I have.
emotional affairs or something? Okay, so if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few more questions
Yeah.
about this. So what happens when there's been no sexual, you haven't stepped outside sexually of your relationship,
Yeah.
but you are now having lots of fun. I mean, so many people would just say, well, can't men and women just be friends?
Yeah.
And I think that they can, but I do think, to your point, I think it can be if you start to hide it from the partner, and all it really takes is like one person to start misinterpreting. Like, so when maybe when this was happening for you, maybe the individual who you were having this relationship with, all it takes is for her to start thinking, well, maybe this is a possibility. Like, maybe I really do have
Yeah.
feeling like he's the best thing ever, etc. So I think that it's a really dangerous and slippery slope. So what is the conversation that happens between you and your wife about the situation, and then how do you start to, and she is willing to, as you said, take responsibility for her role in it. What does that conversation look like?
Yeah. So girlfriend, to be clear, long time ago. I was at a meditation retreat and I met this woman and we sort of hit it off. And right before the meditation retreat, my partner and I were in a big fight. And so we were in a vulnerable place where I was like kind of really negative, spinning out about my partner and, gosh, she's so high maintenance, or, whatever. And then all of a sudden there's this person who's really easy and attractive, and we instantly hit it off. There was just chemistry. Now, on the surface, that looks like that's all that was going on. But later, when I went to therapy around it and dug into it, I was like, and I had to really own like what was going on for me. I uncovered a lot of anger. There was hurt that she wasn't in this meditation community with me. I was judging her spiritual life. And I was not being direct, saying my feelings are hurt. I'm judging you. I wasn't being transparent about any of that. I just took it kind of underground, and then it would come out sideways in snarky behavior, comments. And then on her side, if I remember right, it was like, yeah, I didn't ever validate your how important this was to you. I never understood the total impact. I wasn't curious. I was kind of defending myself and kind of like going over here, doing my own thing. And so, it was just a rift. It was kind of like a rupture in our connection that we never really got to the bottom of. And so it was like left open and vulnerable for, someone to come in.
What do you think are so in that same vein, what do you think are some of the things that men and women want in relationships? We're talking a little bit about this in the pre-chat. I have some inclination in terms of what I think women want and some inclination in terms of what I think men want, but I'd love your opinion on it.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be helpful to set up that frame with what you said earlier, which was, I think you said women want to feel safe and men want to feel respected,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, there's more to it, but I think that's a
Sure.
starting point. If a woman doesn't feel safe, I think she's going to get her defenses up, and I think if a man doesn't feel revered and respected, he's not going to sort of be the head of the house, if you will, or to tend to his family.
Yeah. Well, I just want to challenge the male side of this because I'm always like, where does this come from that men want to be revered and respected? And I think that's true, but I think that's actually what that's playing to is the male ego rather than who he actually is underneath his ego, which is he's very much similar to her, which is he also wants to feel safe emotionally. He really wants to be able to open his heart and let down his guard and take off his armor and be his naked, transparent self without judgment and criticism. So many guys, their biggest button is, if you make a comment about something he did, and this is so true with me, I have a very sensitive button around criticism that like I feel like I'm doing it wrong or I feel like I didn't do it right or whatever. And this has a lot to do with my dad and I's relationship growing up. And I think a lot of men are like me. They're very, so why would I want to cater to his defensive strategy of, oh, I need to respect you and revere you? Because how dare I actually make a comment that might suggest that I'm pissed off at you or you've done something wrong? Like, I want a guy, if I'm a woman, I want a guy who's like willing to be like, I don't want to be revered and respected. I want my feelings to matter. I want all my messiness below my defenses to matter to you. I want you to care as much about me and my life as you care about you and your life. I want you to take an interest in who I really am, on and on. So that's my bias, but I do think there is a certain type of dude that wants that. And that's okay. If two couples can agree that like, what do you really want here? What do you really want? If that's what they really want, okay, cool. Have your relationship behave in a way that, caters
They
to
work. Yeah.
caters to those two.
Mhm. So we're really not that different. So men are really not from Mars and women are not really from Venus. We just all want to feel safe and loved and understood and seen.
All of us want to be accepted for who we are. Absolutely.